Welcome to FBC. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're really excited you're here. As you can see, the weather is getting better every day, and the virus numbers are going down every day, and we know that sooner or later, we're going to be able to be together, and we're really excited about that. No matter what, we're going to continue to do our live streams as we have, even if we're able to join together in some form or fashion. And we really would love it if you would invite your friends, your family, and your coworkers to join us on Sunday mornings. It's really easy to find us. You can just tell them to go to YouTube and type in FBC Sycamore in the search bar, and our channel will pop up. They can subscribe to the channel and they'll get alerts every Sunday morning before the service is coming live. There's some other information for you here, just to my side. There's a phone number that you can contact to stay in touch. You can also contact us by email. Those are both there for you. And if you have been giving financially to the church, or you'd like to start giving financially to the church, in the YouTube description below this video, there'll be a link that you can use to give financially. So just click in the description and find that link. Makes it super easy. Obviously, the church has expenses every week. It continues to operate, even if it's operating differently than it has. You as a church have been so faithful to give. God has supported us in incredible ways. And we want to thank you and ask you to continue to give as God leads you. Once again, thanks for joining us. Make sure you're inviting your friends and your family and your coworkers. We can't wait to be together again. But for now, let's worship together on the live stream.
Good morning, FBC. Thank you so much for joining us today on Sunday, May 17th. It's been a while since we've had a chance to see each other in person, but we are just so excited to be able to worship with you via live stream. We want to thank the live stream team for putting this all together. We're going to start today's service with Lord, I Need You, which I think is the perfect song during this time. I come, I confess, bowing here, I find my rest. Without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you, oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness, oh God, how I need you. Where sin runs deep, your grace is more. Where grace is found is where you are. And where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Lord, I need you, oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness, oh God, how I need you. And teach my song to rise to you. When temptation comes my way, and when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. And Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need you. righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. You are my one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you.
Oh soul, are you weary and troubled? No light in the darkness you see. There's light for a look at the Savior, and life more abundant and free. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. His word shall not fail you, He promised. Believe Him and all will be well. Then go to a world that is dying, His perfect salvation to tell. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. In the light of His glory and grace. We want to welcome Gotham up this morning to read from God's Word, from Daniel chapter 1, the whole chapter. Gotham, go ahead.
In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, the chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of the time, they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel said to the steward whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see." So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus.
The splendor of our King, clothed in majesty, let all the earth rejoice, all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, in darkness tries to hide. It trembles at his voice, it trembles at his voice. And how great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? Oh, we'll see how great is our God. Age to age he stands, time is in his hands, beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead three in one, Father, Spirit, Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? Oh, we'll see how great is our God. You are name above all names. You are worthy of all praise. And my heart will sing how great is our God. You are name above all names. You are worthy of all praise. And my heart will sing how great is our God. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? Oh, we'll sing how great is our God. How great is our God? And how great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? Oh, we'll see how great how great is our God. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art.
God, thank you for being so good to us. We can't even take in how big you are, how good you are, how you've provided for us in so many ways. Help us to see through the story of Daniel how you're there every step of the way with us. Help us to walk in that faith, in that assurance. Help us to be strong like Daniel. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.
All right, well, I don't know if you've been keeping up with the news these days, but everything has been changing. We can't figure out whether we're going to open or close or what's happening or what the time frame is. And coronavirus, I mean, it has done so much to change our lives in just about every way possible. We don't even have commercials that sound the same anymore. Everybody's gone to this, like, I've got to prove that I have moral and spiritual authority to keep my business open. So all the commercials reflect that, and we have this, here at Random Burger Stand, we're here for you. We know that food unites us. It's like everybody starts talking in these moralistic, slow tones as if we all have to have the whole world rewritten for us. What is going on? The world has changed. We're in our homes. We don't know what the future looks like. It feels like all of our foundations are completely ripped out from under us. And what are we going to do with ourselves? Well, when everything is changing, we have that question, is anything going to be the same anymore? Is anything going to be the same? And Heraclitus, he once had this great quote. He's a philosopher from about 500 BC, and we're about to look at Daniel, who that starts in about 605 BC, about 100 years before Heraclitus wrote this. And Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." He's saying that everything is always changing. And that's true. I have gone so many different places in my life. I've moved multiple times. I've lived in the desert of El Paso, which was a port city where I was one of the only people that was not bilingual. I also lived in East Texas, which is kind of the South, really, and there was a Southern culture there. I've lived in big cities. I've lived in tiny little towns, and it seems like there's always culture changes. And one good thing about that is that it really does, and all of the change, help us to remember what's really important. What are the priorities? And the most important thing to remember when everything is changing is what God says of himself in Malachi 3:6. He says, "For I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore you, O children of Jacob, are not consumed." So for those of us who put our faith in our God, we know that we have an anchor that will hold through every storm of change. We know that God is on his majestic throne of power, so that whatever is happening, he's in control. And that's what we're going to be talking about as we look at the book of Daniel as a whole, which we've entitled the series for Daniel chapters 1 through 6, Brave. And that's because God has given Daniel the ability to be brave because of who God is. Daniel's in some crazy changing situations too. And we're going to see through the book of Daniel the absolute amazing sovereignty of our God and how he can predict hundreds of years in the future the details of how nations will change. And not only that, but he's predicting what will happen for us, future beyond our time. So God has shown himself to be in control in the book of Daniel. He's shown himself to be very, very big in the book of Daniel. And in Daniel chapter 1, we're going to look today at what happens to Daniel, this teenage boy, as he is ripped from his home and he's moved to the scary city, the city that has conquered all the world, the capital city of the people of man, the people who are against the God that Daniel serves. He's moving there into enemy territory. And this gives us so much reason to read this book today in these times because we don't know what's going on. We don't know how to deal with things, the changing world. Daniel's world changed, and he was given a steady foundation in his God and a steady way forward because of the wisdom and the word of his God to move forward in this crazy place that he found himself. So as we move forward, let's look at Daniel chapter 1, and we're going to first look at the controlled chaos that Daniel found himself in. So Daniel chapter 1, let's go ahead and read Daniel 1:1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, that's in 605 BC, and that was the first of three sieges that Nebuchadnezzar mentioned just in a second, 3 sieges that he laid to the town of Jerusalem, which had stood for centuries without falling. And here Nebuchadnezzar in this first siege takes away the royalty, some of the nobility from Jerusalem, and he doesn't completely destroy Jerusalem in 605, where we are today, but he's going to destroy it in just a little while, in 586, in the future to 605, because that's how BC works, right? So 586 is when the city will finally fall. So in the third year, 605, of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And then 1:2, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. That the Lord gave is so important. It shows God's control, and we're going to talk about that. So he gave Jehoiakim into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. So Nebuchadnezzar took not only people, but he even took some of the sacred vessels from the temple, this holiest place in all the earth. He took those vessels from the temple, plates, lampstands, those sorts of things, and he hauled them off and he put them in the temple of his own God. Now, what is so important about that? I want to talk about that first because it is earth-shattering that the God who created everything, who owns all of the stars and all of the universe, and he has his one place where his worship is centralized in Jerusalem, in the temple, and the sacred objects there are taken and they're put into the temple of a much lesser God, a foreign deity. And back then, we might not understand it the same today, but back then, if someone actually captured another nation and took their God's stuff and brought it into their own God's stuff in their own temple, it was as if they were saying, that God is not as good as my God. It's as if they're saying, my God is bigger than yours. So when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, went and besieged Jerusalem and took Yahweh, the creator of all things, the one true God, the articles from his temple and brought them into this pagan temple in Babylon and kept them there, it was as if everyone in the world was looking on saying, Israel's God, is not as big as we thought he was. It's as if everyone in the world was looking and seeing the shame that was placed on Yahweh himself. This should never, ever be. But this says something about our God. God had planned this all along, and we're going to look at that in a second. But God chose to go into disgrace with his people. Not just the Israelites, not just Jerusalem was disgraced. God chose to walk with them through all of their troubles, through the terrors that they were facing, and even through the shame and disgrace that they were under. He never left them in any way. He was with them. And this reminds us of the cross, because all of us are in the shadow of the cross. All of us have gone astray. We've left this God who is the one true foundation for all of life. No matter who you are or where you live, he is the one to whom all humanity should bow the knee, should look to. And yet we've all rebelled against him. Every nation has turned away. Every heart has turned away. And yet he came after us. And he suffered the disgrace, the dishonor, and the punishment that we deserve as sinners before him. We deserve to be killed. And yet he went to the cross and died himself. Isaiah 53, verses 4 through 5, speaks of Jesus 700 years before the cross with such clarity. He says, "Surely he," that's Jesus, "has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed." That's Isaiah 53, verse 4 through 5, and it reminds us that God is the same God on the cross who went to shame and dishonor on the cross as he was in Daniel's day, where he suffered shame and dishonor and allowed the vessels from his temple to be taken into this pagan king's temple of a foreign god. He's always walking with his people wherever he sends us. He's with us in our circumstance today. He will never leave us. Let's put our full trust in him and become his people through faith by trusting him enough to follow him. And we'll know that wherever he sends us, he'll be there. In our disgrace, in our poverty, when the paycheck's taken away, he's there. When we don't know what the future holds, we know that the future holds our God being there by our side and holding our hand. So he is there. Let's remember that. And so then let's look at the second thing about God, which is how the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. That the Lord gave shows that it was God's plan. God did it. All these other people had attacked Jerusalem but had failed. However, God decided that at this particular point in history, he was going to give the king of Judah into Nebuchadnezzar's hand and send Israel and the people away. That's a terrible sovereignty in one respect. That means that God is in control of even his people being brought into difficult worldly circumstances. So, what do we think about this? Well, we have to see that God had a plan from the beginning. Even in his Old Testament law, he tells his people from the beginning that he will send them into exile and out of the land of promise, Israel or Jerusalem. He'll send them out of that land and into exile if they do not follow him. He gives them the warning. He shows them the way things will be. And Israel fell into idolatry. They worshipped other gods. They fell into sin. They were oppressing the poor. They were committing horrible acts of immorality in every way possible. And so God finally sent them away. And we can know our God's plan. Our God has shown us in His Word exactly what He's up to. So I guess the question comes, if He's done the dark things, will He also do the wonderful, bright things? Yes, He's also got those planned. We spoke just a couple of weeks ago about how He has heaven planned for us, how He is preparing a place for us beyond this life. And He knows the end from the beginning, and He has great things planned for His people, plans to prosper us and to be glorified through us and to grow us out of our sin and our death hold on this world, to be freed to know Him, the God of heaven and earth. So as we move forward, thinking about God's sovereignty and how He's not a God far away that has no hold on this world, that just watches from afar and says, like, what am I going to see next? That's not God. God is actively involved in the world and in individual lives, in each one of our lives. He's in control. So watch for Him in the details. Watch for Him in the corona crisis. What is He up to? That's the big question for us as Christians. It's not what will happen, but what is God going to do? He is in control, and He has a purpose. So we might come back to the question, is anything going to be the same anymore? Our God is still on His throne of majesty. When everything else changes, God remains the same. God is in control. So we've looked at this controlled chaos. It seems like chaos to us, but God has it all under control. And now, next we're going to look at the pressure that Daniel faced. So in Daniel chapter 1, we see that he was taken away from his homeland. And by the way, Daniel's a teenager at this point. So think of the teenagers you know, or maybe the teenagers in your household. And he was ripped away from his home, everything he ever knew, the people who spoke the language that he knew, and he was placed in a foreign land where people spoke in different languages, they had different cultures, they had all sorts of things. So he experienced crazy upheaval. He had nothing left from his foundation. He could carry nothing with him. His parents didn't go with him. He didn't have the culture with him. All he had was probably a fearful journey way across the world to Babylon, which is basically just outside of Baghdad. What is Baghdad today? There was no Baghdad back then, but Babylon, just outside of there. And we have actually pictures out from that area where we can still see the ruins of that gigantic city. Babylon had conquered the earth. It was conquering all of the earth. All of the major empires had folded into Babylon. Babylon was this great world empire, so powerful. And the king was absolutely feared. And his city was enormous and terrifying. Most cities had a wall, but in Babylon, as you can see in the pictures of the ruins of this ancient city of Babylon, the very same city, by the way, that Daniel was taken into, there's a double wall. And so it's two walls side by side. So not just one wall to break through, but two. If you're going to attack that city, it's going to be twice as hard to get through these gigantic walls. And they were gigantic walls. So when Daniel was walking up to the city, there were people everywhere. It was gigantic. It was huge. It was terrifying. And he went in, most likely through the Ishtar Gate. That's where Babylonians would bring all of the folks that they had conquered, and they would bring them through this gate. And it was so terrifying because it was a long walk. If you look at that picture, there's something that says Ishtar Gate right there, and it points to that spot. And you can tell that there's all these courtyards that you're marched through, and all of these areas there. If you can look very closely at that picture, it's this huge parade of shame that you're taken through to say these are the conquered ones, and they're brought into the city as plunder from wherever they came from to Babylon. And so as Daniel walked into the city, he was seeing pictures, these huge pieces of art, people, throngs of crowds surrounding him, and art like right here that you can see on your screen. At the Ishtar Gate, these are some of the actual reliefs that Daniel himself might have seen as he walked through. These are the kinds of pictures. And at the top of the one on your left side is pictures of dragons. And those were lining this Ishtar Gate and the streets. And those dragons were there because of the Babylonian god Marduk. They worshipped Marduk. They also worshipped Adad. And the bulls on the bottom of that picture represent their god Adad. And so as he's walking through, he's being intimidated and he's being shown these gods as if to say, these gods killed your God. These gods are over everything you know, and you better submit. So he's being terrified into a kind of submission. The pressure, oh my goodness. And then of course, on the right side, you'll see pictures that paved the long way into the street, into the city. And those are pictures of lions. Well, we do know that later in Daniel, he faces the lion's den, and the lions were used as this terrifying image and this terrifying threat to the people who would come into Babylon, that if you don't obey, these things will eat you. We have lions here, and they will take you down. So he's being threatened into submission. He's being terrified by the sights of all of these gods, and he is a teenage boy with everything stripped away from him. Just a few friends at his side from home, probably people he didn't even know very well. And they went into this city. But there was something so much bigger than a teenage boy going on at this time. First of all, let's look way back in Genesis chapter 11 to see how God had really orchestrated things. In Genesis chapter 11, we see the Tower of Babel story. And it talks of all of humanity. Basically, everyone spoke the same language and they were getting together. And it says in verse 2 that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. Shinar is where Daniel was brought to in Babylon. So this is the same location. They found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Then it says, come. This is what they said. Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves. So we see that even in the very earliest time, it was at this moment that the people were scattered throughout the earth. God scattered them because they were prideful and they were trying to make a name for themselves. They were all about humanity, and humanity is the most important thing. And let's show the world how amazing humanity is and show ourselves what a high and lofty thing we are. So they were trying to basically show themselves to be gods. And that is what Babylon, this city in the same place as the Tower of Babel, in the land of Shinar, what they're all about. Babylon throughout the Bible represents the city of man. So in Revelation chapter 17, we see at the end of the Bible what the end of Babylon will be. And we see this picture in Revelation 17 of this woman clothed in royalty, and she's sitting on this beast in the middle of the seas, this giant image, this vision. And then in verse 5, it said, Babylon the Great, that's the woman who represents Babylon. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. That's who she is. That's what Babylon represents. Verse 6 says, drunk with the blood of the saints. She basically ate up not only Daniel and his friends in Babylon of his time, but this city, this symbolic city that Babylon represents, the city of man, does not like Christianity. When we're not focused on just this world, where we see something bigger, that heaven and an afterlife is coming, we say things according to our God's values that our world does not value. Just like Daniel in Babylon. We're in Babylon in a very real way. And there's pressure on us all the time. But we have to understand there's a bigger picture. Because then just in chapter 18, verse 2, as you move down your screen here, you can see the 2. It says, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. That is what will happen in the future. The whole Babylonian city of human glory is going to fall. And then verse 3, for all nations have drunk the wine of her sexual immorality, and the kings of earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. So you see sexual immorality, you see luxurious living, you see all of this immorality, and that's what this city of man represents. Living for ourselves, living for our momentary pleasures, not seeking the higher things of God and those spiritual pleasures that last forever. This is the city that is opposed to the city of God. And so we see this giant opposition, and so much of what we're going to see in the book of Daniel as we move forward is how there is this opposition between those two cities and what they represent. And Daniel, he knows this, he's got this bigger picture in his mind because he understands. He's read the scriptures, and we'll see that later in the book of Daniel too. He knows what's going on, and he knows there's more at stake. And so there's pressure on him, but he feels the weight of the bigger picture. He understands the bigger God that's in control over Marduk and Adad, those little piddly deities of Babylon. They have nothing compared to Daniel's God. And so in Daniel 1:4, we're going to look at the end of Daniel 1:4 and read through 7. And we're going to see some more of the pressure that's placed on him and how he's trying to be molded and conformed into this Babylonian world. It says, so when he brought Daniel and his friends there, Nebuchadnezzar planned to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. That's basically the ethnic name of the Babylonians. So teach them the literature and language, and the king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate. So they're given Babylonian food, and they're given the best of it. So they're being taught to be part of the Babylonian culture. They're being fed with all the good stuff from Babylon, to be pressured by their own pleasures into the Babylonian culture. And so they're given the portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years. 3 years of Babylonian education to mold them into this way of Babylonian life. And at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. So the Babylonians are changing their names from these names that are Hebrew, and they reflect their God. Every time you see El at the end of a name, that means God. So Daniel and Mishael both have God in their names. And when you see Hananiah and Azariah, that AH at the end is reflective of Yahweh, the covenant name of their God. But their names were changed. So Daniel he called Belteshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. So basically they're renaming them to say, you're not belonging to your God anymore, but you are a part of Babylonian culture and the Babylonian gods. So they were terrorized into submission at the sight of this gigantic city. They had education and cultural inculcation that was just feeding them the lies of Babylon constantly. And even their names were changed. Even their names were changed. Babylon was trying to re-identify them. Guys, the Babylon we live in is trying to re-identify us. The world is always feeding us its culture, its goods, its foods, its pleasures. It's terrorizing us often into submission. If you don't walk the line, then all of culture will be against you. The authorities might come after you. There is so much that this world is trying to change us to make us different, to be like them. If we belong to our God, we cannot be like the world. God is different. Actually, James says that he is at enmity, or there's a hatred, a battle between God and the worldly things and the worldly values. So we have to be different and we have to stand up. And in Daniel, we see how he stood up because he chose one thing to be true to his God that would make everything, his identity, everything, show everyone that he is not giving up on his God despite the terror, despite the pressures. He's not giving up. He would be true and triumphant. So let's see what Daniel resolved to do. In Daniel 1:8, it says, "But Daniel resolved." And we all have to have resolve if we're not going to just sink into our culture and just be conformed to it. Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. He actually asked this eunuch in this crazy, scary city, and he had this authority that was placed over him in this eunuch, and he had the power under the king to throw him to the lions. He had the power to kill him, to report him to the king, say, this guy is not submissive, let's just get rid of him. Their lives were not counted worth that much. They were conquered people. And so the bravery of Daniel comes through here. And here's what God did. Here's another God gave in Daniel 1:9. God had originally in the Daniel 1:1 given Jehoiakim and Judah into Nebuchadnezzar's hands, but here in Daniel 1:9, God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. So why, number one, did Daniel choose to make his stand with the food and the wine of the king and say, I'm not going to eat it? Well, the Old Testament, Daniel's scriptures, our scriptures, the Old Testament had this way of identifying its people through symbols, the symbols of food, the symbols of purity, what you eat and drink and where it's sacrificed to, what really played into how you understood your spirituality. Those things are symbols that are made real in spiritual ways for us today. But in Daniel's time, the food was often sacrificed to gods, and especially meat and wine. And so what Daniel chose to do is he said, I don't want to eat any of that because it's probably been sacrificed to your gods. And though you have pictures of your gods everywhere, I'm not going to eat that stuff. I'm not going to submit to your gods. I'm not going to be part of their sacrifices. I'm going to be true to my God. My only sacrifice will be to Yahweh, King of Israel, Lord of all the earth. And so he didn't want to eat the king's food, his wine. Instead, Daniel chose to eat veggies and water only. So that's a dietary sacrifice if there ever was one, right? But in eating this, he avoided the sacrificial items with just the veggies and water. So in his act of faithfulness, we see that God gave Daniel a way through the storm. God gave him compassion and favor. Daniel was brave because Daniel's God was bigger. Daniel knew that God was in control of everything. And as we place our faith in the God who is on his throne, we too can be brave to stand up and face the trials we're going through. We don't have to be afraid. Our God is too big and we are too loved to the point of him sacrificing himself on the cross. We are too loved and God is too faithful and too powerful for us to fear. We are his. That's our identity. We might as well be named the Lord's. That's who we are. And so we can be brave even if the world takes our paycheck away. Even if the world won't let us go outside anymore or go shopping or whatever we want to do these days. Even if the world doesn't let us meet as a church, we can be brave because God does not change. He is with us. And then Daniel also was very gracious as he spoke to the chief eunuch. And he didn't, I might have been more pig-headed. My wife often says that I can be a little bit pig-headed, and she's right. But, I might have just gone up to this eunuch and said, hey, I am not going to eat that food. I don't eat stuff that's sacrificed to idols. No way, just take it away. I'm not going to do it. Daniel was wiser than me, thankfully, and he was also more gracious. And so he asked the chief eunuch so politely and nicely that maybe if you just take this food and just give us veggies and water. It was such a picture of God's grace and graciousness and compassion through Daniel. Who our God is determines who we are. Who He is gives us our identity, and we're always moving closer and closer to the identity of our God because He's forming us and shaping us through the changing trials around us to be more like Him. God was forming Daniel through these circumstances. So what were the results? Well, Daniel had gone and asked the chief eunuch if he could not have the king's food and wine, just give him veggies. And the issue was, if the chief eunuch was found to not be doing what the king had commanded, the chief eunuch was afraid. He's like, the king will have my head rolling. This king was scary, and he didn't want to go up against this king. He didn't want to even possibly give the king a reason in any way to throw him out or to kill him. And so Daniel, hearing the fear in the chief eunuch, he goes to an underling of the chief eunuch and says, hey, just test us. If you'll just test us, and we'll see what my God will do. You take away the king's food and just give us veggies and water for 10 days. And if we're wasting away, if we're not gaining weight like all the other people will with all the rich foods from the king's table, then we'll see what happens. But if we're doing great, if we're just as fat and healthy, then don't give us the king's food anymore after that 10-day test. Well, Daniel 1:15, the results at the end of the 10-day test, at the end of those 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. Now, in our culture, we might not think that fatter in flesh is better in appearance, but in their culture, if you're well fed, that means you had enough resources to actually feed yourself well. It was a sign of wealth, and it was a sign of status. And so the veggies and water somehow made Daniel and his friends fatter in appearance. So, by the way, a lot has been said about the Daniel diet. All I'm going to say is the Daniel diet makes these folks fatter. So you got to kind of be careful. That's not what the Daniel diet is actually all about. I'm going to give it some credit. They don't follow this and think, but I don't know why they call it the Daniel diet. But anyway, so all that aside, they got fatter. They got fatter eating veggies. God gave them not only this moment of success in their diet, but He also gave them a great ability to learn everything that they wanted to teach them in Babylon. So Daniel and his friends rose to the top of the class. Daniel and his friends were put in the highest places of the court, and they were given a position where they could influence the city of man, where they could speak into that culture. Daniel and his friends were able to speak to the king, basically the prince of the world and the world's values, and to share with him the truths of their God. Guys, we are here not to conform to the values of our world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our minds as we read God's word, as who He is soaks into us, as we're given His bravery because He is so big, His compassion because He's given us so much grace and love. We love others and we love the people of this world, and we don't conform to what they want us to do all the time, but we're gracious about it. And then we share with them the truths of our God. Not conformed, transformed. And we are crazy in love with our God, so we are vocal about Him. Let's be lights in this crazy dark world, this Babylon that we live in. Let's be lights and let's stand up for God's word. Even if everyone around us wants to basically put us in our place and to think that we're horrible because we're standing up for the truth of God, for His ways, for His cross, for the wisdom of placing ourselves below the King who is King of kings and Lord of lords, Jesus Christ, Yahweh, God who came for us, the God who is in control. He gives us the ability to be brave and true. And so as we move forward from here, no matter what has happened to you in this COVID crisis, in this COVID captivity, we're in a Babylonian captivity with Daniel, but we're kind of in a COVID captivity here in our own way. God will give you wisdom. Seek His word, seek His heart, and live for Him. Let's reach out and let's be brave, let's be compassionate, and let's shine His light into all of the world around us, whether we're locked in our homes or whether we're moving forward into the next phases of reopen. And God will give us Himself, and He'll change the world through us because He has a plan and He's in control. We'll see you soon.
Lost, but He brought me His love for me, His love for me. Who the sun sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Realize He has ransomed, His grace surrounds. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, He died for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who You say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who You say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who You say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who You say I am. Oh, I am who You say I am. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. My Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am.
Thanks for joining us this morning. I wanted to fill you in on a couple things before we go. And the first thing, many of you received the email and heard that Larry Hafner did pass away on Friday. And so we are praying for Patty and the family right now. I'm going to miss Larry. He and Patty are always such an encouragement to me. And the thing that I want to remind us of, even as we're mourning, is that we have a hope in Jesus. We have a hope that will not disappoint us, and so we can rejoice in that even in the midst of our mourning. And And we do want to mourn with those who mourn, and so I encourage you to be on the lookout. The office is going to be sending out information as we get it during this time of restrictions, how we can celebrate Larry's life, where you can send your condolences. All of that information will be coming from the office through the email, so keep a lookout for that. And this hope that we have in Christ that we hold on to, regardless of circumstances, is where we find our joy. And next week, we're going to have an opportunity to hear from one of our deacons, Josh Johnson. He's going to be sharing about his experiences of having the coronavirus and how God has met him and his family in that time. So I encourage you to join us next week. We'll be hearing, again, this message of hope that we have even in the midst of dark times. So join us next week. Be praying for Patty and the family. Thank you, church. We are a family, and we have an opportunity to share this light with those around us. And so I encourage you to invite people out for next week to hear this message of hope. Thanks for joining us.